Okay, well, we will go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome everyone to this month's edition of Discussion Bound. Discussion Bound is our monthly book group. Sorry, I didn't get the music started in time for us to enjoy that this morning. My apologies. My name is Christy McMillan. I'm the Director of Learning and Engagement here at the Asheville Art Museum, and I am joined by Judy Upjohn. Judy, for those of you who have been coming to book group in person, had been a partial year resident of Asheville and had started her journey with the museum by coming to book group when she was in town. She has since become a museum member and also a docent trainee. She will be graduating to a docent next month. Is just a really, I think, thoughtful person and super interested in art. And when I asked for volunteers, she said, Christy, I'd be happy to lead one of the book groups. So thank you, Judy, for joining us and for agreeing to moderate today's book, which is Why Your 5-Year-Old Could Not Have Done That, Modern Art Explained. So before we get started, just a couple things to note. By default, as you were logging in this morning, your microphones and video were muted. If you would like to unmute your video, feel free to do so at any time, and I'll let you know in just a minute or so when you'd be okay to unmute your microphone as well. We do recommend that you choose a quiet room and close the door to silence any alerts from nearby devices. That's especially important when we are in a program like today, which is a discussion-based program, and lots of people leave their microphones unmuted, and so it can be a little distracting when there are all sorts of dings and zings and other chimes. If you are going to unmute your video, we recommend that you try to avoid sitting in front of windows or lamps or other strong light sources, which make it difficult for us to see your smiling face. Use headphones and microphone for best sound quality. While you can log in using a smartphone, you can see the slides and meeting tools best on larger screens such as desktop, laptops, or tablets. Make sure that your screen name includes your first name and last initial or first name and last name so that we know who we're talking to. To ask questions or to make comments, you'll be able to unmute your microphone here in just a minute. We do recommend that you leave your microphone muted unless you're actively making a comment or asking a question. If you prefer not to jump in with your voice, then you can type into your questions into the chat box, and Judy and I will check those occasionally to make sure that we're not missing anything. If you also don't feel comfortable sort of jumping right in, you can raise your hand in the participant sidebar, and either Judy and I will call on you and unmute your microphone. I can say that just based on previous discussion programs, we have these at least once, if not twice a week. When folks raise their hand in the participant sidebar, sometimes their hand can stay raised for quite a while because this group gets really used to sort of unmuting themselves and jumping right in and contributing to the conversation. So if you do want to raise your hand, just know that it might be a little bit before we get to you to unmute you. We are recording today's program, so if you prefer not to be recorded, just make sure that your video and audio remain muted and use the chat box to submit any questions or comments. So Judy, I am going to make it now so that everyone can mute and unmute themselves at will, and I will hand it over to you.
Thanks, Christy. So it's my pleasure to do this, but I have to say I was a little roped into it because during the docent training, we were talking about getting, about people being a bit afraid sometimes of museums, intimidated by them, and unable to connect with abstract art. And so, how can we as docents help to get people less nervous around abstract art and find sort of footholds for them to engage with it? And I said, so what do you do if somebody says, oh, my 5-year-old could do that? Christy said, funny thing, there's a book about that. So I thought this was really interesting right off from the title. I mean, before I even read much about it, I started thinking about that whole notion of the idea that a 5-year-old could do art that would hang in a museum. So I just wanted to ask you all first, is this a question that has gone through your mind? Have you ever stood in front of a work of art and thought, oh, my kid could do that, you know, that's not very important, or whatever version of that? Is this a common thought, or have you heard other people say that? Unmute yourself.
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
yeah,
I've
this is,
heard. Yes. Yes.
I've heard
other people
say that, particularly in, you know, a museum when they're walking and they'll run by it and say, oh, you know. So I think we do need to think about how we can address that issue when it's raised.
Yeah.
Adult friends say,
Anyone
I
else?
can do that, and they're artists. So I can do that.
Sorry, Barbara, say that again. Is it just
Can you
me,
say
or
that
is
again,
today-
Barbara?
Is today a little laggy with the video and the audio, or is it just my computer?
Yeah.
It is.
Hopefully it'll
I
catch
think
back
there's
up.
lagging for me too.
Yeah. Barbara P., you were making a comment.
Christy, I'm saying it's not only children who say that. I've been with adult friends who've walked through the museum and said, "Oh, I could do that. Oh, I could do that," and they're not even people who are artistic. Or, you know, they say, "Oh, well, I could do that." I've had some people say that too. So it's not only people say children, but a lot of people feel that they could do it.
Yeah.
So it's not only
Linda
expressed by
Schroeder,
children,
you made a
children,
comment.
but it's expressed by adults.
Linda,
Yes.
Linda made a comment. Yes, this is why my daughter bought me the book. Is that because you have said that?
Yes, and you may know Hillary. She works at the museum there, and
Sure.
So many times we would go to museums together. She as an adult, and I'd say, "I don't get it. You know, anybody could do that. A little kid could do that." So she bought me the book a couple Christmases ago. So now I've read the book, and I still don't get a lot of it.
Michelle Dorf, you have your hand up.
I suppose
It goes
that we should
along
talk
with
about
the
that,
question.
you know.
I think it.
Sorry, this has never happened.
No, it's
before.
okay,
I thought that
Christy.
book nicely went from.
Yeah, and I can't see the hands raised.
It's
So,
okay. Michelle Dorf has
Oh.
her hand up.
Michelle,
Do we
go
have to
ahead.
raise them?
You don't have to, but
Yeah,
I'm just calling on
suggesting
people with their hands up.
because-
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm suggesting that we have Christy do the raise of hands because Zoom is so digitized today that it's really sounding to me like people are not, it's not people. The conversation just keeps overlapping and it's hard to be engaged with the conversation.
I'm gonna try something. I've never tried this before. Judy, I'm going to make you the host of this meeting. I'm going to log myself off and I'm going to restart my computer and I'll come back, but you guys can sort of stay where you are in the meantime, just in case it's my computer that's the problem. So I'll be back in just a minute, but in the meantime, I'm going to make you the host, and Judy, you would need to go ahead and record for me, okay?
Okay. So, is that better? I see that Beth and Billy, Beth and Billy both have their hands raised. Is that old, or do you want to
No,
say
that's new.
something?
Yes.
Yeah, me too.
No, that's, if I may just say, I found it interesting that the book was very interesting. It was difficult to really read because of the size of it, and it was small, so I was constantly cross-referencing and going online to actually look at the work of art. But it bridges, the span that it bridges starts with modernism, and really starts with the Impressionists and goes all the way into performance art, which is, in my mind, contemporary art. So I thought that the breadth of scope was a little bit greater than I was expecting or hoping for. I worked a lot with modernism. I did appreciate the references and explanation of contemporary art, particularly installation art, because I think it's hard to interpret a lot of times. That's all.
Yeah, Joey made the comment that he thought that anyone could do certain performance art until he saw some performances that changed his mind. And so
I don't think a lot of people could do a lot of performance art.
Well, I was talking about the ones where people just sit down and don't do it. They're just still. You know, they just sit there.
So I'm still having trouble hearing people.
Well,
I'm still having trouble hearing people.
So can everybody hear me?
It was the
Yes.
performance art.
Yes.
It was the.
So sorry, Joey. It's not my computer. It just must be the internet or Zoom. I'm not sure exactly what the issue is. What would you all like to do to continue? Should we try again in 20 minutes or?
I think it's that everybody's trying to talk at the same time, and then people wait because they don't want to talk at the same time. And so I think it would work best if you just like saw the hands raised and
Call on us.
Yeah, usually this works just fine. I think it's because the internet is laggy, so people are starting to talk and then realize that someone else has started to talk. So how about this? Why don't we, Judy, just try, and I will let you know who has their hand raised. And if it's not in the order in which you raise your hand, I'm sorry, because I haven't been able to see. But we'll try it that way and see if the internet will catch up with us. How does that sound? Judy, can you make me, okay, I am co-host. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna start calling on people that have their hands raised. Is that okay? So Kathy, your hand is up.
I just thought the way in which she organized the book helped explain what her her thinking. First of all, it's really about the 20th century, not the 21st century, and not really the 19th century. And so I think if we think of it from 1900 to 2000, and then the progression, and she had each of the pictures sort of take you through that progression. I thought starting with toy, the idea of objects or toys, I don't think any of the artwork are toys actually, but I thought the idea that the artist's toys with meaning was really interesting to start that concept as the very first chapter. And so if we think of trying to think of what the artist is toying with in their artwork helps take you through the progression. And ultimately, I thought landscape actually, although I'm not sure if that was the last one, it wasn't the last one, but I thought the chapter on landscaping took you nicely from the beginning to end, and to think of a pile of tires as landscape or art, I think probably would have been one of the works of art that most people would question. But again, going back to what is a tire, a pile of tires, tires take you through the landscape. It's how we get through the landscape if we're driving, either on a bicycle or a car, or even on a train, going And so he started with something that takes us through the landscape and then had us, lay it out. And so visually it is a landscape, not a very pretty one, but that's also, I think, a part of the question is, yes, a pile of, and burning tires, and what are we doing to that? I thought he took something that implies landscape and then takes you and makes you question, why did he use tires and what does tires do? And I know driving, I've seen tires piled high that are pretty ugly. And so I think it's not something I would put in my home, maybe a picture of it, but certainly not as an object. But I think it certainly raises a lot of questions from the traditional landscape that you drive through and think of as beautiful to the environmental issues it raises today.
Thanks, Kathy. Judy,
That's all.
did you want to comment on anything that Kathy had said?
Yeah, I want to say that you got a lot from that, just, that chapter title, Landscape, Playscape. And that's the sort of thing I think that that people need, is some way to look at the image and think beyond, oh, it's just a pile of tires. So it sounded like the way this author titled her chapters helped you do that. It also sounds like you're used to doing this with art.
Beth?
I agree with some of the art that was presented and their descriptions, but and there were a number of pieces where I wish there was a different name we could call it, like thought-provoking objects rather than art. Because I think what made it art was the meaning the artist gave to it. And for example, the lobster on top of the telephone. A 5-year-old could put a lobster on top of a telephone. They would put a different meaning to it than he did. And the one piece of art where it was just a single slash, a 5-year-old could do that, but they would not have the same, they would maybe impart a different meaning. And I'm just not sure if, so I get that it was very thought-provoking and they had particular meanings, but I don't know if just because it's thought-provoking, that makes it art. Because you can do a number of thought-provoking things, but does that necessarily mean it's art? I don't know.
Thank you.
Yeah, I thought this title of this book was going to lead into that question of, is it art or not? Why is it art? And I think that's really underneath this, oh, my kid could do it, or I could do this. And the lobster, I don't know what page that's on, if any of you haven't
It was right
read
at the
this
beginning
book,
of
but it's
the
by
book.
Salvador Dali.
Mm-hmm.
It's by Salvador Dali, and it's a lobster on top of it's a fake lobster on top of a telephone, an old-fashioned telephone. And there were supposedly, and I don't know if the author is, presuming this or getting this from Dali's words, what he said about it or what people have written about it, but it's about food and sex, his obsessions with food and sex. So that's one of the things that I thought came through in this book, and that was, it's a 5-year-old couldn't do something like this with all the multiple meanings. And I think somewhere in the book, the author writes about multiple motives of the artist. And it's a lot of this art, I think, Beth, you were saying that it's, you can't get it unless you know a little bit more about the artist or about the context or about, the art world.
Thanks, Judy. Linda, you had your hand up. Let me, okay, you're unmuted.
So thinking to the canvas that has the slice in it, is it art? My question is, if that artist was a one and done, if he just produced one slice one canvas, put it in a show, whatever, would it be considered art? Or because they're an artist and they have a multitude of works, is it then considered art?
Yeah, good question. What do you all think about that?
Doris, I'm going to unmute you. Sorry. Thought I did. There you go.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now. Actually, I was going back to Judy's comment about actually needing to know a little bit about something when you, in order to, I guess, appreciate it or get some meaning from it. And I guess my concern, because that's kind of what I was thinking as I was reading through this book, particularly some of the art that was most challenging for me and art that I wasn't familiar with already. And I think that then for someone who hasn't studied art or studied these artists, I think it almost makes this visiting a museum that might be showing this, it might just seem very elitist to some people and could really discourage them from exploring.
Thanks, Doris.
Did others of you get that impression from this book?
Yeah.
I'd love to hear what people thought about the book.
Billy, I'm unmuting you.
Okay. Well, I thought I really enjoyed Kathy's interpretation of the tires because it demonstrates she has a strong academic background in art. And to me, it demonstrates that particularly with modern and contemporary art, the importance of having a docent lead a group through, or an individual, through starting to think about the interpretation of the work. Because if we think of art as academic art, replicating a person or an environment, then that limits our thought about what art is. So I was just going to say, though, if we have someone who has some knowledge of, and it's vast, contemporary art is so vast, someone with some knowledge to help us get around and into the piece. It's kind of like asking the question, so what's going on in this stack of tires? You need more than that to initiate the thoughts.
Thanks, Billy. Judy, what do you think about that?
You bet. Well, you know, one of the things I found in the docent training is that it's incredible what a group of people can find in a work that initially doesn't seem to yield much. But one person will say something and find something, and another person will make an association with something else. And pretty soon, you know, sort of the group mind can really dig into work, even like the slash on the blank canvas, that I think for an individual it can be really hard to approach, you know, or to think about. It's like if we're used to seeing things a certain way, that's a slash on a blank canvas. Like, you know, what else is it? I don't know. It's a hole. You know, it's edges. You know, I think it's hard for me as an individual, and I don't think I'm atypical in this way, to push beyond my habits of thinking about things, about, you know, what I'm looking at, and find associations that are new. And artists, I think, are trying to do that. They're trying to find associations that are new. And so as viewers, we're kind of at a disadvantage, I feel, because if we don't know about the art, or we don't know the biography of the artist or the background of the artist, we need help to find out, to be able to think beyond what we're used to seeing and how we're used to thinking about it. What do you all think about I don't think I'm atypical, but I might.
Sorry, you're definitely not atypical, Judy. Kathy, your hand was up first.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think Christy does a wonderful job, and I assume she's probably teaching your curatorial or your docent classes, is getting people to be comfortable asking questions or even to putting forth their ideas, because I think that's the hardest thing is, I'm not educated, so why would I have any idea of what a tire is about and what, and so, but I think the docent, if you make the people really comfortable with that, their opinion counts as much as anything. And I know as an artist, because I am, I remember one time having a piece, it was a feminist piece. I had put it on the wall and it was about, all my feminist concerns. And someone looked at it and said, that's a urinal. And I had never, ever thought of it as a urinal, but I had to consider that because that's what someone saw in it. And I think as an artist, we learn from the people's opinions of what if it's there and someone sees that in it, then it's probably in it. And I can't say, oh no, I didn't mean that. Well, if I didn't, then I better think about it. And so I do think, the uneducated, quote, in terms of the arts, has a lot to bring to any artwork that they're looking at. And I think that's the docent, what a docent does is they allow people to have an opinion about what they're looking at. And, just the other day, I was in the 3 class thing or the 3 picture thing on Friday. And had learned a lot, right? Learned a lot from the other people looking at the artwork that we were looking at. And I thought it was really very useful. And so, I don't think it matters what your background is. We each are people and we bring those thoughts and feelings and experiences, and they're real, they're honest.
Thanks, Kathy. What do you think about that, Judy? Judy? Wow, Zoom has never been like this before, as you all know, when you've logged into our programs. This is so frustrating. Beth, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. Your hand was up next.
Okay. I think as humans, I say it as adults, we can take an object and attach a personal meaning to it fairly easily because that's what we do, is attach meaning to many things. And just like we take animals and anthropomorphize them. And I will go back to that lobster on the telephone. For me, what I would think of, I have dear friends that live in Maine, and I go up there every summer, and we spend our time going around to different places to find the best lobster rolls. And so when I look at that telephone, the lobster on the phone, it makes me think of my dear friends that live in Maine, and we communicate by telephone, and the thing we have in common is our love of lobster. But if I were to put that lobster on the telephone, because it had personal meaning to me, who would consider that art? I feel like it was because it was Salvador Dali. Again, that whole idea of it was somebody famous or an artist that was already known for his other art, that when he did that, then it was interpreted as art. I guess that's the whole question is,
yeah,
we could almost take anything if we have a personal meaning to it and say that's art.
Yeah, I think Joey hit the nail on the head in the chat box. Joey said it's many times the message that makes the difference, that the object itself is one thing, but it's the artist's intent, meaning or message that makes it into quote unquote art. Thanks, Beth. Tim, you had your hand up next. I'm going to unmute you. Hold on, Tim. Just a sec. There you go, Tim.
Yeah, okay. By the way, I'm barely hearing you, Christy, so a little bit louder maybe. Anyway, I was just going to say that one of the more interesting things is that someone like Dali was thinking in really large terms. Maybe those 2 objects or even combined, it didn't have any personal connection for him, but he had big ideas he was working with. And so they don't always have to be personally personal in the same sense. They may have a personal connection, but that isn't necessarily going to be the defining moment. On the other hand, you know, we think about the urinal that Duchamp presented, and before that was the very first object that he presented as a piece of art was a metal bottle washer rack. There's a version of that. The third version is in Chicago, and those aren't personally emotional objects. Those are, yes, he had a connection because he had he had them at home in some form, but that isn't necessarily personal in the same sense that we often think of personal work in art now. And but at the same time, we're expected to bring our own context often to these kinds of to art, and so we can't go in there as a blank slate and say, edify me. It really does help to have some kind of background, some kind of experience in life, and it doesn't have to be art necessarily, but it does have something to do with experience, and that's what essentially the docents end up doing, is helping people make a connection and validate their experience regardless of their age.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I think that you and Kathy are 100% on the same page with your comments. Definitely in line. Doris, I'm going to unmute you.
Yeah, I think really the same comment that Tim and Kathy had, because my hand was raised from a while back, but
I know I'm doing the best I can.
I guess to add to that, to add to that, it wasn't a criticism of you, just let you know, my mind is kind of moving ahead now. But just to add to that, I guess if in the discussion, and this goes back a little bit to what Judy was saying as well, if in a discussion with other people, I begin to have more ideas or more, I can relate more to a piece of art than before I first looked at it by myself, and I get some meaning out of it, then it seems, for me, even if it's not the meaning that the artist intended, it would still be art to me, and I would still find some value in it.
Thanks, Doris. Michelle, you've also had your hand up for a while, and I'm trying to unmute you. I don't know why it's not working. There you go, Michelle. No, you've just muted yourself. Hold on. Let me unmute you again.
Myself.
There you go. Go.
Okay. I just want to, I have a couple of things. I thought it was really interesting that Kathy's art piece, that it was about women's issues, etc. And what this man saw was a urinal. I just thought that was a very interesting juxtaposition that I wanted to comment on. And as far as people not feeling comfortable being in museums and not thinking that they know enough about art, I think that that's a big part of the population, and that docents do create that bridge for people, if those people are even willing to step into that world. I have a friend I was speaking to today about slow art days, and she goes, oh, well, I don't know enough to participate. And I said, well, you can be on mute and you can have your video off and you can just listen and get some. And she goes, oh, okay, I'm more comfortable because of that whole culture of I want to have the right answer. So I think, again, going on a docent tour is very beneficial to expand and have a connection to art. I know that that's what was so for me, and what had me get interested in the museum more and become part of the docent program, was because I would look at something and it was really all based on, do I like it, do I not like it? Not having any background or any understanding or any connection, and then hearing other people and their interpretations or projections just opened me up so much more, and it still does. I was looking the other night at the Whitney Museum and their sculptural garden, and they have a lot of big, and in my opinion, really ugly, weird, big sculptural pieces up there. And I'm like, oh my God, I'd love to go on a tour because I'd like to have some understanding of this, all of these things that look incredibly ugly to me. And one more comment is there was an artist that I actually had purchased a piece from back a while ago. And I said to him, I said, so what was the inspiration for this painting? And he goes, I don't know. I don't remember. So it isn't even always something to share with people what the artist had in mind. Oftentimes they didn't have something in mind. And so art really is left to interpretation. And I think everything is art. I think it's all encompassing.
Awesome. Thank
whether
you
we like
for
it or not.
that.
Sure.
Judy, you're back on. I think you were having problems with your internet too. Do you have any follow-up?
Yes.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, sorry. I got totally kicked off everything. Yeah, so this is an interesting topic for me because I do have trouble with the art notion. And I want art to be about something that is beyond sort of the ordinary connections that I could make. I'm not an artist. I want to be transported by art in some way into, I want to think differently. I want to see something differently. And so the idea that everything is art, or some very, very simple things that I think a child could make are art, I have a hard time with that.
Yeah.
And yet, but I also think, that it's a shame that people feel that they can't participate in a discussion about an artwork because they don't know anything already.
Yeah. And, being someone who lives their life at an art museum, I hear that a lot, either from people that come in and say, I don't know how much I'm going to get from this today because I don't really know anything, or I've come with someone else and, we're really just coming for that person. Or, talking to people outside of the museum, oh, you work at the museum. I've never been there. I'm not an art person, whatever that means. So definitely those barriers to why people either participate or not participate has a lot to do with not necessarily the artworks themselves, but the way that people perceive their own understanding and what they can contribute.
Yeah.
I try and get everybody through the door because everybody's got something to say once they sort of get involved, just like you said, Michelle. Sylvie had made a comment in the chat box, Judy. She said, listening to everyone, I'm wondering, are these considered art because they're springboards for conversation? If we don't know the artist's intent or the history, how is this different than taking any two objects and putting them together? I compare this to contemporary literature, some of which I appreciate without the history and intent, and others that do not appeal. I think that that's maybe some of the things that you were saying you were struggling with as well, Judy.
Yeah, and in this book, the author does talk about intention a lot, maybe not explicitly, but wherever on these, there are 100 artists in this book and 100 artworks. And so every artist and artwork has a 2-page spread. And where there's the symbol of a question mark, that's where the author is addressing the question of whether a kid could make this art. And a lot of them, I noticed, had to do with the artist's intention.
Yeah,
and
just like Joey said.
Just like Joey said. And, sometimes I think Sylvia also made a comment about art being disturbing. Is it art because it's disturbing? And I think that's one of the motives that artists have, to disturb the status quo, to try to shake things up, to make people think beyond the normal boundaries. And I appreciate that. But it also takes a real open mind, which I sometimes find myself I just can't open my mind to some art.
Yeah. Joey, you had your hand up, and I'm guessing it's a follow-up to your comment, so I'm going to try and unmute you. There you go.
Yeah, I was just saying, this book contained a lot of artists that I was not familiar with. And I would have just walked by them in a museum or said, what is that? But when I read the description of the intent and the message, it made me stop and look at it. And then I found it more interesting. Maybe not beautiful, but I found the message very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Barbara P. made an interesting observation in the chat box, and I'm going to put it to you, Judy, and then see if other people have comments too. She says, if the message needs to be explained and the artwork doesn't make the message apparent, and you need a docent, is that a problem?
Well, that's a controversial topic. It always has been, you know, like what is art is a question that you can't even ask it anymore because there's really no answer to it, or there are multiple answers to it. But, you know, I think I have known of some artists who say, if everything that you get from my art is what you should get from my art. And I don't want you to know anything about, you know, my intention or my biography or my background. Get it all from what I make and what you see. And other artists, I think, really care a lot about their personalities and their personas and their intentions and the context that the art is created in and all of that. I think it is one of the most intimidating things about art is that it sometimes is seems completely obscure without, and the same as poetry. Poetry is like that too. If it's not in sentences we understand or figures or objects that we can look at and recognize, we want to know from the artist what the heck is going on there. And I think that is a problem, but it's also what makes art art. So museums, and I mean, somehow we do have to deal with this problem.
Yeah, thank you. Linda, you were waving at me on the video, and I'm assuming that is your hand being up. So let's see if it'll unmute you here. I don't know why it's so laggy. Just a second, Linda. I'll let you know when your microphone comes open. I don't know. There you go, Linda.
All right, I just unmuted myself. And my hand was up a while ago, so I don't know if there's a lag in the video too, but I have a question I just posted. Is it art because the artist thought of it first and, you know, put it out there? So for example, you know, spin art, right? We've all done that. So if I was the first one to put it out there, would I be the artist, or you know, is it that I need to have, I need to be prolific in my art? I need many more art objects or that I, you know, can put meaning to in order to make me an artist. That goes back to my question of if you're a one and done, you know, is it like if I just do one painting, am I considered it? Let me ask you this as a professional, is there an artist who's only done one painting in their entire career, or one, you know, sculpture, or one piece of work, and is known for that and only that?
Are you asking me, Linda?
Yeah.
Trying to think if anyone comes to mind, and no one is coming to mind, whether it's sort of an academically trained artist or a self-taught artist. No one is coming to mind as sort of, I think what you're saying is like a one-hit wonder, or somebody who like writes the great American novel and it's the only thing that's ever published that they've written. I'm not thinking of anyone that is sort of equivalent in the visual arts? And feel free to raise your hand if you can think of someone that I'm missing. Oh, Tim Lewis, he's got his hand up immediately. Go ahead, Tim.
I'm thinking about people who seem to make the same thing again and again in some form. We might say production work for someone who makes glass or pottery or any number of other things like that. In some form, that kind of repetition is basically this making the same form again and again with the same intent. So in that sense, a lot of people have done that. A one-hit wonder, there are certainly people who probably got known at one point like that, but it may well be, especially someone who's a folk artist who worked on one project their whole life, that might also qualify. But to be known for it in a real public way, probably not. Not much of, anyway.
So Linda, does that, and I'm trying to unmute you again. You can't, don't hit, there you go. Okay.
Yeah, it just comes up, unmute myself, and that seems to work.
I've got it so that folks cannot unmute themselves. So I think that when I'm trying to unmute you, you're working against me. You keep muting yourself again. Go ahead. So does that is that along the lines that you were thinking?
Well, that's one answer, with the production. I think that an artist, well, for example, I was throwing pots for a few years and trained by a man who had me, be really precise about what I was doing, which I think was a good start to learning how to throw. And then this woman was nearby in a studio, and she was pinching objects like salt shakers and lamps and things, and pinching with really terrible shapes and rough edges. And it's, as I was learning, I was thinking, gosh, that art is, those objects are really rough. But she was prolific. She made tons of this stuff, and she had a following, and she had people that were buying this. And so I often wonder if, these artists that are famous and their art, is it that they have produced so much in their lifetime that they have found a following, and that's what makes them their art be recognized? Like, I don't know what Andy Warhol did before his Campbell soup cans, but when he finally came out with that Campbell soup can, is it because he was already an artist in the art world? Other artists are looking at his stuff saying, yeah, that's really cool. I see your meaning there. You know what I mean? So how much does being prolific in what you produce make you famous enough where you could, put a lobster on a phone and call it art?
I think it does make a difference. Linda, this is Judy. I think that when I think about self-taught artists, used to be called outsider artists, some of them do this, many of them do pretty much the same thing over and over and over and over and over. They carve wood, they make wood into animals, or they make figures, or they paint on trees, and if they didn't do it often and prolifically, I question whether people who are interested in art and sort of discovered them and brought them to the bigger world would think of them as artists. I think that, to my mind, one of the things about an artist is that that person makes art continuously. Always is compelled to make art. And the art can be the same kind of thing over and over and over and over again, or because there's a compulsion there, an obsession of deep interest, or it can be different, can be experimental. But I think that is one of the things that does separate a kid making one piece of art, or me making one piece of art, from someone who can be called an artist, is the continuation of the activity, you know, constantly doing it.
Michael, I'm going to unmute you. Just a second. See if this Zoom is going to work for you. There you go, Michael.
I just realized I needed to click that button. So thank you. I didn't know if you were seeing the hands raised by just clicking in the participants
yes, I can see
box
that.
there. Yeah. So very good. Because I couldn't raise my hand because my camera doesn't work.
I understand.
Well, there's just so many things to segue off here. Well, just in terms of the last conversation that's kind of been going between Tim, Judith, and Linda here, you know, I just was kind of reflecting on, in my own experience, this was working in wood many years ago, and I developed not only these particular pieces, but I developed all of the protocol, the tools, the machinery, the whatever to develop them after being told by checking with people all over the country. This was in woodworking, whether this could even be done, and I was told that it just couldn't. Well, I did work it out, and I ended up taking these pieces and turning them into production pieces. And they became very, very popular, particularly in New Orleans, but also in various cities around the country. I ended up with maybe 1,000 of these pieces left after I closed my business back in New Orleans. And my wife is infatuated by them, you know, and every time somebody comes, those are the things that she goes to show them. And I'm just like, I won't say I'm not horrified, but I'm just like, they are so not art to me. They are so like, I mean, the process of building that, you know, of really investigating, creating the tools, the process of seeing these first things come out, and they are really, I mean, and she shows them to everybody. Everybody wants them. I said, "You got to be kidding!" You know, take as many as you want. You know, and I just don't regard them as art at all. But I do regard the process of making the tools, the process of really investigating, coming up with the idea of all of that. That was an artistic expression, but it no longer holds that for me. And so I think that you know, as artists, we're thrown into this dialectic, this dilemma of we've got to make a living, and one of the ways that we make a living is we turn some of our pieces of art into production pieces. I think that it is a dilemma because it really loses its sense for me of being art anymore. I'm not interested in collecting production pieces from anybody, let alone, you know, make them myself anymore. But anyway, that's just you know, an experience riffing off the conversation was there. The other thing that I just and I don't want to use up too much time here, but I wrote down a couple of things, just key words: intention, perception. You know, what is art? Is it in the eye of the beholder? Is it maybe it's in the heart of the artist? You know, instead of that, even if there's no eye to behold it. You know, I just wonder how much of our experience in looking at art, or one's experience of looking at art, really is looking at that, is really perceiving that piece of art anyway. I mean, we bring everything in our life history, the piece of art could remind us of something that was either beautiful or it had nothing to do with anything. Is that art? You know, and is it art just because it moves me? You know, for a while, that's what I thought art was. Look, if it moves you, it's art. But I really question that, because I can look outside at a particular way the sun hits that tree, and being able to like except for that little piece of landscape, that everything else disappeared, and then that becomes something that I've never seen before quite the same way. Nobody made that, but that strikes me in a way that feels like a piece of nature's art. And there's just one last thing about intention. You know, I'm thinking of Bob Dylan and you know, this and contrasting him with Leonard Cohen. And Bob Dylan, he often said he had no idea where it came from. So there's no intention. I mean, the words fell onto the page, and we would write it in 15 minutes. Leonard Cohen labored for 20 years for Hallelujah, marking out every word, every this, every that. And so it's the whole idea of intention, and, you know, where am I, you know, what does it mean that painting painted itself, or that piece of music wrote itself, or whatever. Anyway, these are all just questions, and I was just riffing, and so thanks for letting me do that.
Michael.
Yeah.
I love Michael's statement, Judy, is art in the eye of the beholder or the heart of the artist?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to go to also. I wouldn't use eye and heart necessarily in that kind of division, but really, art might be the thing that the person who produces it calls art. I mean, art is artifice. It's not nature. Nature isn't art. It can cause, you know, an aesthetic reaction in us, like Michael was talking about, looking outside. And but I think art is something that gets made, and it can seem like art to people who are looking at it, or it can seem like it's not art, or it's good art, or it's bad art, and the artist can think that something is art, and then it becomes production and slides away from art and into that production thing. You know, so these things, I don't think these things, I think they're on spectrums, you know, I don't think there's like an either or to it, but definitely the artist has a lot to do with the thing being art or not. How it's created, all of that, you know, we're interpreting and we're reading about and we're figuring out after the fact. But the person who made it is really, I think, the authority on whether it's art or not.
So we have time, thank you, Judy, for just a couple more comments, and both Kathy and Morty have had their hands up. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, Kathy. Go ahead.
Well, again, I've had it up for a while and I can't remember exactly, but just going off of Judy's comment about spectrum, that there is a spectrum, I think, of art, and you know, each of us within ourselves, when we take a picture, you know, we certainly want it to be a good picture, probably. I mean, maybe it's just the family or whatever. So there's that end of the spectrum, and then there's the sort of breakthrough in terms of historical ideas. You know, after the First World War, after the Vietnam War, there were really major changes in art because they were questioning what was happening. And so I think a museum probably is wanting to look at those sort of breakthrough concepts, as opposed to maybe what I do in my own studio. And so that's the spectrum I think Judy was referring to. And museums want to educate us on the sort of more major development of idea thinking. And I think it'll be interesting to see what art comes out of this pandemic. To me, it's been a pretty major event, not just probably less to some of us who are retired and it doesn't change our day too much, but I think to the world it's going to be an like a world war, like a Vietnam. So I think it'll be interesting to see the art that comes out of speaking to that, the art that comes out of it.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. Judy?
There are a lot of great comments in the chat panel. I'm just urging everyone to read them. Not that we'll have time to go through them, but emotion has been brought up, and visual appreciation, and how much those things play, and in something causing an aesthetic experience in us. Beth Dean took issue with me saying that art is something that's made, by bringing up Duchamp's toilet urinal. And right, I mean, the point was it wasn't made, but it was manipulated. It was offered as a work. It was, there was intention behind this particular piece. And even if something isn't made, that's true. It is manipulated in some way, I think, by the artist, I think. But even that, I'm not sure about.
The urinal?
Yeah.
Sorry, the fountain, let's call it by its correct title.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did. He turned it upside down, but also wrote on it.
Yeah.
So definitely has meaning. Morty, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you.
Okay. I was just wondering if for this type of art, if there shouldn't be a scale kind of like the Emperor's New Clothes. If there were 100 on the scale of the Emperor's New Clothes, then maybe it would not be considered art, and the obverse or reverse would be the difference.
Would you have viewers vote? Would you have us vote?
Well, I let each individual vote on his own to what degree he considers that art, or is it really simply an example of the Emperor's New Clothes, that it's not art?
Who are you addressing that to, Morty? You're saying he. I don't know who you're referring to.
Anyone.
Oh, well, I think that there are works that I think are the Emperor's New Clothes. I think they're just it's just salesmanship that has made them art. And to other people, they would be quite moving and valuable as artworks in themselves. So again, that's the subjectivity and the spectrum we're talking about.
That's a really interesting thought. I think that we can probably end on, Judy, that and it's something that Sylvie brought up too, that something that may be profoundly moving to you as an individual might just look kind of like a pile of junk to someone else, and something that looks really great to someone might be very profound to someone else and might mean nothing to someone else. And so I think a lot of the artworks in this book probably were hit or miss for a lot of us, and we may or may not have agreed with the author as to why she felt like this was, a profoundly moving work of art or not. But I think that that's what we all bring to the table, what we were talking about earlier, that we all need to learn how to trust our own judgment and experience and what we bring to the table more, and make some of these determinations for ourselves. Do you have any closing thoughts or comments, Judy, after having spent some time with the book? Because I know we talked about talking about this book in May quite some time ago, and so you've had time to sort of sit with it and absorb it, maybe more than the rest of us.
Yeah, I have just a couple of things in closing. One thing does directly relate to the book, and that is that she makes the point sort of early on that artists have particular means and intentions and contexts, and that all goes into the work, whether it's a, you know, quick bit of lyrics by Dylan or labored over, it still is a song for Dylan. And that children make art depending on their developmental stages. So children under 4 love scribbles. I mean, they don't make representational art. They don't like representational art. They like scribbles. And then as children get older, their art becomes different because it's a developmental process. And that there's also a developmental process in how people understand what they're looking at when they're looking at art. So a lot of this is subjective, and a lot of it also has to do with our experience, our exposure, and our development in terms of understanding what we're seeing.
Yeah,
but the
so
other thing I wanted to say is,
sorry, I was just going to point out that you had created those handouts for us about making art, stages of artistic development, and interpreting art, stages of aesthetic development. So I had just made these really sort of simple slides so that we could refer back to it, and those are the stages that you had gone through. But the handouts that you created, I did send out with the meeting information so that people can go back and review them and learn a little bit more about that.
Great. One last thing I just wanted to say is that the most important thing, I think, for us as humans is to think about why we like something or don't like something, to try to probe ourselves, to understand more about our own reactions, and to enjoy those aesthetic experiences when they come, no matter where they come from, whether it's nature's art or, you know, or art that's made, or the craziness of the fountain, you know, being an artwork, to just try to sort of nurture those aesthetic reactions and understand them better by asking ourselves more questions. Because art is really, I mean, it's for the artist, but it's also for us. And so why, you know, why close ourselves to any of it? Why not, you know, use it to try to enjoy the world more?
Yeah, thank you, Judy. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I am absolutely mortified by the state of the internet today. Usually we have a very free-flowing conversation, as those of you know who have tuned in to Slow Art Fridays or to our discussion bound program last month. And I kind of hated having to mute people and have to come back to comments sort of long after they were fresh in your mind and you were sort of jazzed about them. But I think that given the circumstances, we probably did the absolute best that we could to sort of give people voice and address some of these questions and get to some of the things that you were on or that were on your mind. So thank you, Judy, for being patient and for having a modified version of today's discussion. And thank you all for sticking with it, for contributing your thoughts and comments, both in conversation and in the chat box. We look forward to seeing you all next month. Next month's book is going to be a big change of pace for us. For the first time since I've been here, I have issues, as some of you know who have been coming to book group, with poetry, which we did talk a little bit about earlier, as one of those things that can be, for some people like myself, very opaque. So we're going out of our comfort zone next month, and we are going to read a new volume, newly edited and published, called Black Mountain Poems, an anthology by Jonathan Creasy is the editor. And it includes poetry by some of the biggest names of Black Mountain College, such as Joseph Albers and John Cage, MC Richards, Charles Olson. And to help guide us, it's a very thin volume. It's only maybe less than 100 pages. And to help guide us in that conversation are Jay Bonner, who's the assistant head of school and a humanities instructor at the Asheville School, as well as Joseph Bathanti, who is a professor of English at App State University, also our former poet laureate for the state of North Carolina. And both Jay and Joseph served on the museum's team to reinterpret the collection in preparation for the reopening and reinstallation of the museum. So I felt like if we were going to do poetry, bring in the big guns so that they can help us talk through it and enjoy it best. So again, thank you all for coming. I will send information about the next book discussion in a couple of weeks. But in the meantime, if you would like to get your book, just remember that our friends at Malaprops offer us not only a discount if you're getting a book for book group, but also if you live within Buncombe County, they will bring it right to your door. I also got a message earlier today from Malaprops that said that they're looking at a limited reopening next week if you'd like to go pick up your book. So thanks again, everybody. We will look forward to seeing you all soon. Judy, you look like you wanted to say something?
I did, thank you. Sylvia's asking whether this discussion is open to everyone, so I thought it'd be good for you to make it clear.
Yes, thank you. In the same way that you signed up for today, we do have a limited amount of space for our discussion bound program. So head over to our website, have a look at the book, and if you would like to join us, just send me a quick email and I'll put you on the list. So thanks for asking, Sylvie. Take care, everyone. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, everybody. It was great.